Welcome to First Berserker Khazan Madman review. Played the game on PlayStation 5, finished it after around 70 hours, realistically around 60 hours, but hard to tell because the game was running in the background when I was editing guides. Started New Game Plus but couldn't be bothered playing anymore. Not gonna spoil anything about the story, but some bosses are going to be spoiled. Can't get around that for points I want to make. There's gonna be a special segment as well, the Madman segment that I usually do, but this time around it's going to be about people online saying phrases like get good, skill issue, etc. Unfortunately, games like these are full of those ignoramuses that couldn't analyze a grilled cheese sandwich and are hurting the quality of the gaming industry, so let's start with the show, you cheap bastards. Also, Neo is going to be referenced a lot because it's clearly an inspiration for Khazan and it's the same game essentially with a different story, skill tree, aesthetics and abilities. First Berserker Khazan follows the story of General Khazan and his fall from grace. Him and his best friend Ozma defeated Hismar, a big-ass dragon that was a threat for all humanity. For his reward, Khazan got thrown in chains, but why and who did this? Interesting story why that has happened, that I won't spoil here. Then the Blade Phantom joins the party sent by the Netherworld's big head to accompany Khazan and deal with the soul disbalance. Those are the basics. Very good potential to tell something truly magnificent, but unfortunately story pacing is a mess due to the mission structure and the game never fully going deep with it. There's a severe lack of story events to create something meaningful. Basically you'll be going through a mission and after the boss fight there's gonna be a reaction, oh yeah, there's a story and point behind all this. It's a shame, because there are a couple really interesting side stories that were superficially told. One of them that got stuck in my head was about two brothers and how chaos got to their homes. It's all told in such a way that mostly you won't care and then maybe at the end you will, but it's too late because the side story is over. After playing these mission-based games I appreciate Devil May Cry more and more. A rare game that tells interesting stories and has interesting characters in a mission-based game. In Khazan almost none of the characters get enough screen time because lots of them have decent backstory for you to care about, but the frustrating thing is they never really run with the idea of doing something more with it. I could honestly care less about any of the characters. Khazan himself, even though cool looking, has the charisma of a blank paper. Overall there was a potential to create something much more meaningful as there is a good template, but it ended up as a half-arsed told story. I won't count story and characters into positive or negative because it's not good or bad enough to be in either of the categories. Both suffer from same superficially presented writing. One of the things that I've noticed that I can't explain why that is, and is something I'm asking the audience to explain if they can, is the atmosphere of this game, or lack thereof. If you go through the stages there are lots of interesting details which usually make for a great atmosphere. Burnt piles of bodies on the streets, extracting souls that tell thoughts of the fallen person, experiments in labs. Everything is there to create a fantastic atmosphere, but for some reason I've never felt a damn thing. I've spotted all of those interesting details cause I like that type of stuff, but why wouldn't I care? What is the missing link? I think it has something to do with the cel-shaded style that softens everything, but those are pre-rendered backgrounds and are not that cartoonish like Khazan and the enemies are. I can't put my finger on why this game has no atmosphere. Maybe the problem also comes from the story pacing that never really drags you in that much. I would love to hear your thoughts on why that is, aside from the two reasons I've mentioned. When it comes to mission and level design, it's basic. Outside of those above mentioned details and a couple interesting locations, there is nothing really special going on. Linear, unlock shortcuts, hidden energy or collectibles and jarlings. Lots of cheap deaths though, where we plummet into death. Both of those collectibles are very useful and can benefit the player tremendously, which is great. Problem is, why would anyone in their right mind in a linear combat heavy game put a really cute and interesting collectible that are jarlings into jars that need to be broken in each mission? And there's a lot of jars in each mission, with only one having a jarling inside. Hey player, see those bunch of enemies, go kill them and then kill some afterwards, and then there's a big bad boss too, but you know what, why not go around smashing jars? What a terrible implementation of a really cute collectible. Overall mission and the level design also not a positive or a negative. Very few things stand out and very few things are below average. Now we get to the gameplay part. A lot to say about it. Let's first talk about the player combat system, meaning what players can do, how good are the abilities, how it all plays out and so on. In this regard, Khazan is one of the best games I've ever played. 10 out of 10 in my opinion. It's such a well-designed system with enough interesting moves to continuously impress no matter what weapon is being used. Khazan can block, dodge, perfect block, perfect dodge, use interesting abilities, mix short and long combos, use brutal finishers, transform into Blade Phantom with its own moveset. It's a game that can be played in a simple way and be effective, and also be interesting to high skill players due to aggressive moves that negate damage on startup, or something like swift attack cancelling move with the dual wield. 3 weapons are available: Greatsword, Dual Wield and Spear. Some might say only 3 weapons, but I've never felt like that was a negative. To master each weapon takes some time, and then there's enough abilities to switch things around to make things interesting in a different way. I've played most of the game with Dual Wield because the combination of sword and axe as a main weapon to me is an incredibly unique idea. One region I've cleared with the spear and found it to be really fun and well designed with cool moves, which isn't easy to do considering we are talking about the most basic peasant weapon. Haven't played with a greatsword because I don't like the aesthetics of oversized weapons in every game, not just this. Subjective thing, nothing against the weapon itself in Khazan. It's impressive how this system allows aggression from every defensive move. Perfect dodge into combo, perfect block into combo, ability that nullifies damage into combo, dodge back with dual wield to throw axe defensively and then to attack from back foot. Dynamic up the wazoo. What Khazan also does great is the effectiveness of light versus heavy versus charged heavy. Every attack has its usefulness and can be chained into other things. Outstanding. One of the most polished player combat systems I've ever had the pleasure to experience. Animations are also so tight and polished, which is important, especially to me. I always mention animations in games as being one of the most important things in combat, as it can take immersion and impact of combat to another level. While Khazan is second to none in that regard. For such a combat system to truly shine, we need good dance partners that are the enemies. Unfortunately, this is where Khazan's overall quality drops significantly. There are many reasons why. I've heard people say there is not enough enemy diversity when going through missions, but that's not the case. There's more than enough. Not an abundance of diversity, but good enough. Problem is that most enemies are not interesting to fight against, especially elites that are going to have a section of their own. Over time, there are more and more interesting enemies and less dogs and such nuisances that are killed in one hit. Also, fighting bats and spiders doesn't make things more interesting, but less so, as it isn't the type of enemy for this game. Spiders spamming leg attacks and spitting venom, bats flying above trying to grab you, Later, thankfully, enemies become far more interesting with experiments coming into play, more human enemies and so on, but it still doesn't help overall because all enemies suffer from the same issues that I'll mention in a bit. Lack of interesting fights plagued by parameter issues, cheap deaths, a lot of annoying ranged enemies, and terrible elite enemies make for a mediocre game most of the time we're going through missions until bosses. Elite enemies take the cake though. Some of the worst special enemies I've seen in games with very creative idea to stick buffs on top of them to diminish the player's effectiveness. Buff like Frenzy that makes elite enemies that have it impossible to stagger. Imagine such a brilliant design where combat plays out in a way that the player is basically chipping at a stone while those enemies hit like a truck with everything they do. Leads to very tedious and diminished experience due to combat system limitations in such instances. Some of the enemies would be quite interesting, but due to their buffs, encounters against them play rather basic. One of the side bosses is an elite enemy that heals significantly with each melee hit due to it being a vampire, while having a large health pool, ability to dish out proper damage, and has frenzy on top of it. Talk about preschool level creativity. It just creates tedious encounters that don't play well due to imposed limitations. Problem in action games is when a challenge comes from altering enemy parameters to break the rules, like elites with frenzy, in order to diminish the player's effectiveness instead of making enemies better through challenging AI where they still operate under the same rules as the player does, where they are able to mix things up and have some sort of defensive AI that isn't predetermined. Before I talk about why this is more of a parameter difficulty game than anything else more interesting, let's talk about the bosses briefly. What pisses me off is the developers have managed to create a fantastic moveset variety for each boss, one of the toughest things to do. They will challenge you in many ways. We are running, blocking, dodging, reading what is going on. It's very dynamic. Bosses also have hidden mechanics where they can be interrupted in directions. There's also the case of Volbino, where we need to use the ladders to change the battlefield due to the bastard doing some kind of a nasty attack. Really well done. Aesthetically, bosses are incredible as well. This is something most developers struggle with, so to have hard part done just to fuck up the parameters is so frustrating. So what am I talking about these damn parameters all the time? Unfortunately, parameter-wise, this is one of the least quality action games I've played, and it affects everything. First, developers had a terrible idea to give bosses insane health pools and also give them the ability to do stupid damage with most attacks. This is by default cheap difficulty because you can do boss fights really well for 4 minutes just to be killed by the boss in 2 or 3 quick combo hits. Start again. Definition of cheap. Even Team Ninja in Neo didn't do that, and Neo can be incredibly cheap, but Khazan makes Neo appear fair. Team Ninja at least had the brains to give players and the bosses ability to do high damage, but bosses didn't have insane health bars, so the fights weren't long but were short high damage affairs that worked well because of it. Large health pools combined with high damage is a bad idea from the start with cheap artificial difficulty intentions. Imagine fighting a boss where most of his attacks do medium to high damage, with few attacks being unique that can justify high damage, but most being done the same or similar looking that do the high damage anyway. Why? Fuck logic and creative damage variety. Look at this example of an attack that should do very little damage but instead does a shit ton. These kinds of things happen against every boss. It's nonsensical. Then there are so many inconsistencies on how these bosses play out and how they do things outside of the rule set. Tracking attacks being one of the funnier fuck-ups. Imagine fighting a boss where half of his attacks have a medium amount of tracking where movement and positioning matters, but then half the attacks have 90 to 100% tracking that nullifies any movement if it isn't a dodge or perfect dodge. Look at this brilliance. 600% tracking projectiles in a row. 6. Couple more bosses do this. Spam the same thing over and over again. Why? These bosses have a really good moveset variety, but in a stamina based game where it's not easy to manage it, we have bosses spamming things like this with 100% tracking. Or bosses repeating moves like the defensive bubble in some of the fights. I've seen situations like in Princess Elena fight where we break the bubble just so that she puts up the bubble back on in the next 10 seconds. And the last boss, my god what a horrible fight. It's like watching the latest Transformers movies. Great effects and visuals, horrible quality. Spams AoE and projectiles all the time, flies away while regenerating stamina, has 3 health bars. Attacks with his weapon, while projectiles follow him, which basically means that 3 or 4 attacks are coming in a second that do high damage each. Then there's another thing that every boss does, which are delayed attacks that I really wouldn't have a problem with if they didn't end with instant attack animation. This creates weird hitboxes that are out of rhythm, especially cheap when there are 3 or 4 hit combos with delayed attacks with instant attack animation at the end of each of the attacks. Come on. When you account for all the things mentioned above, it unfortunately creates cheap artificial difficulty fights where bosses do things out of the rule set with poor mix-ups that are most of the time just basic spam, especially later on in the game. Same problem like with Elden Ring bosses, by far the worst bosses done in a From Software game. Same poor behavioral AI. Considering large health pools and high damage output with all the inconsistencies like the poison hyper armor system that I'll talk about in a minute, half and half tracking attacks, spamming the same things over and over, Khazan becomes a memory game more than a skill game. Remember most timings in order to be able to perfectly avoid most of the damage. This makes boss fights play out inorganic and more robotic. Yeah, people are going to learn all the timings after some time and then do insane things to bosses, and that's going to make them feel good about themselves. But that's not a good type of a fight when memory is more important than skill. I could teach a monkey to beat Khazan in 4 to 5 years. Does that sound good for what is supposed to be a challenging game? And now the worst part, that is the poison hyper armor system. Worst I've seen yet in action RPGs. Talking about being inconsistent. Most deaths come from the fact that there is no real dedicated attack cancel except for partially being able to do it with dual wield, but only with swift attacks. So the player starts the combo, and some combos have longer animations than others. Enemy gets staggered, so the combo can continue. Mid-combo, enemy decides, oh, I'm alright, and then proceeds to hyper-arbor through player's attack to dish out damage where players can't do a damn thing because of being stuck mid-animation. If by any chance boss decides to go with a combo instead of just one attack, then players fucked, because they have already spent enough stamina for the combo, so that even if player's animation is done and they manage to pull a block or dodge, if it's not a perfect one, then stamina gets depleted quickly and completely leaving the player with thumb up their arse waiting to die. Just another way of fights playing robotic and not organic. Or what about this? Does this look like a good thing in a boss fight? Slapping the shit out of a boss due to a horrible poise system. Not to mention that because of their large health pools, we are going to have to do things like this many times over in one fight. It's tedious. Horrible poise and hyper armor system manages to create cheapness and clunkiness on both player and enemy fronts. Such a shame, because of how incredible the bosses could have been if there wasn't such a parameter fuck up on all fronts. Due to all the things mentioned above, I can't call bosses good. Decent and by far the best encounters in the game. But that doesn't say much compared to mediocre normal enemies and atrocious elites. All things considered, enemy design across the board is mediocre, which is all because of the parameters and numbers. Not because of the moves or aesthetics, as those are great for the most part, unless we are talking about spamming stuff like projectiles, spider 7-hit combo, scalpel doing grab attack with weird hitboxes 6 times in a row, or similar low quality stuff. Another reason why enemies aren't that good is that most enemies have no defensive AI, except for some cheesy jump backwards or predetermined dodge or float where they can't get hit. Unfortunately, people are going to superficially conclude how amazing the boss fights are because of the aesthetics, and the fact that they strung together a couple of moves that looked cool and slapped the boss a little, which made their dicks hard and pussies wet. Great thing about boss fights in Khazan comes from the player's combat system, and not the enemy design. Let's move on to character leveling progression. Gotta commend the armor sets, very nicely done, with most being quite useful with the bonuses and awesome looking, which is always a big plus in my book. Aesthetics matter in games. Same as skins matter. I get pissed off when people start to defend full priced games selling skins with that moronic excuse, it's just skins, it's fine. Whole system is copy paste from Neo, so if you liked it there, you'll like it here. There's also phantoms that provide different bonuses like those Guardians in Neo. Guardians were definitely more impactful and had more of a personality, as these phantoms are just a thing on the paper that provides boosts. While there is good build variety, overall it comes down more to the skill choices. Builds do matter, but not as much in New Game, they matter more in New Game Plus and onwards. System as a whole is a positive, which is mostly down to skills available that are truly incredible. Big downside though is the special effects on gear crafting. Why did they have to make it RNG? In a New Game Plus, I went to switch some special effects and spent 300,000 souls in a minute to try to get the stuff I want. Yeah, fuck that. Hard-earned souls wasted on a special effect casino. Even a Neo 2 allowed us to choose affixes. Big minus for the character progression system. Few sentences about video and audio before we start wrapping this up. Graphically, the game looks solid with plenty of details on bosses, Khazan, missions, but not so much on regular enemies and elites that look a bit basic compared to the rest. Cel-shaded graphics for me in this game works incredible, and I love the dark and bloody art style. Nice combination, but I get that some people won't like the cel-shaded thing. Matter of taste, I guess. In this game, when done like this, works well in my opinion. Visual effects are fantastic, but can clog the screen too much at times, which is a problem when fighting same-sized enemies or smaller, because it can be hard to see if they are staggered or not. Sound effects are fantastic, as those add a lot of oomph to combat. Music is alright, but nothing special. Voiceover I went with is Korean and it sounds good, no clue how the English one is. Now we get to the Madman segment. Waited some time for this. I've been having lots of debates with Git Good skill issue and such Rise of the Ronin and Khazan players, of which rarely anyone had something interesting to say. Even prominent players that have their channels dedicated to these types of games doing high level stuff have very little ability to analyze enemies. So I did a bait video for Khazan as part of Ramblings of a Madman series, where I talked about a terribly done elite enemy. Everything I said there stands, nothing baity about that. However, what I specifically put as gameplay are parts where I've died playing nonchalantly. Then the last part of the video I've put the gameplay where that same enemy got relatively easily beaten. My goal was to bait the fools with the previous two badly played parts where I've died when I was talking about bad enemy design throughout the video. All facts and all eyes are subjectivity. And what did Get Good people do? ignored everything I said about the enemy and were focused on what I was doing in the video. Skill issue, you should do this instead of that, and so on. My goal was to show how these people have no clue what they are playing. Reason is that skill and enemy design are two separate things. Skill is on the player, enemy design is on the developer. None of the things the player does matter for the enemy design because their moves and parameters are set in stone, hidden mechanics included. Did I beat the enemy easily in the end? Yeah. Did I beat this game with most bosses relatively without much trouble except for a couple where I've struggled like the last one and the Viper pre-nerf because it was a terrible idea to put such an enemy as the second boss? Yes. Even though Viper is one of the better designed bosses in the game. So where is the skill issue then? And what does it matter for the enemy design? If I said I had trouble against every boss and couldn't progress through the game, ditched it and said fuck this, bosses suck, then you would absolutely have the right to say that. But I could be the worst or the best player in the world and bosses would still have inconsistent tracking, artificial difficulty to large health pool and high damage output, inconsistent poise system, cheap hyper armor attacks, spammy moves. Get good people are a big problem for the gaming community. They are narcissistic fools that bought the game, beaten it, got a hard on based on what they did and not what the enemy did, and then think that because they are great at the game that the game is great. That's a logical fallacy. Otherwise, if the game isn't that good, their success doesn't matter as much, so they have to put up a front to defend their purchase and time invested when most are just average players. They think they can do some things because their mom said so since the poor girl was being forced to watch them and applaud while not being aware of what is going on. Personally, I don't care about them attacking me as I know where I stand with action games. Depending on the game, I'm either decent or good, not great, not amazing. Of course, I wouldn't be good at something like Rise of the Ronin because I've only played for 10 hours. Mastering such a game in 10 hours would be quite bad for the reputation of such a highly complex combat system with cheap difficulty design, wouldn't it? But I can see games for what they are, and that's what bothers many modern gamers due to them attaching their identity to the game. And the reason I'm calling these people out is because they are one of the reasons why games like Khazan, Rise of the Ronin, Wolong and future action RPGs similar to those won't ever reach great or above status. They only care about their superficial satisfaction. I care about the quality of games, and they are detrimental to the quality of action games, so if you are standing in the way of that, you're getting called out. These are usually blind fanboys that are the reason why Team Ninja has fallen to low quality games like Rise of the Ronin. Khazan, as the first game in this new take on Dungeon and Fighter series, has the potential to go in the right or wrong direction from here on out. Series has huge potential, but the good people have the ability to prevent the quality progression. Neo started off similarly, and look where we got to, Wolong and Rise of the Ronin. Far worse games than Neo. I truly think Khazan can be fantastic in future, but parameters need to be way more polished because the base for greatness is done. Hard part is done. This takes me to the final verdict. It's a decent game, that's about it, 6 out of 10. I can say 7 if you really like it and 5 if you don't like it. Scores are subjective in the end, but there is a realistic range of what the game offers as a whole. Going above 7 is unrealistic, as that is glossing over all the negatives and mediocrities. Unfortunately, Khazan is mediocre 70% of the time with flashes of brilliance here and there against some bosses. Same as some people calling this game trash, which is entirely unrealistic because of the incredible things it has done, like the player combat system which is 10 out of 10, aesthetics, fantastic boss movesets, though hampered by poor AI, but with high cool factor when fighting bosses. Anyway, that's it. Description for subscribes to our Patreon merch, etc. Thanks for watching.